everybody, Happy New Year, and welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. But before we jump in, I want to tell you a quick story about my holidays. So, you know how it goes. Lots of family time, dinners, get-togethers, seeing people you haven't seen in a while. And I'll tell you what really stood out to me this year, and that was our new sponsor, Taylor Style. I'm not a guy who loves shopping or dressing up, but Taylor made it incredibly easy to look great at all of my holiday gatherings. They sent pieces that fit, look sharp, and worked for literally everything. Dinners, meetings, casual hangs, all of it. And what really stood out to me was how effortless it's become. I wasn't thinking about clothes at all, and that's when it clicked for me. I'm a subscriber right now, and every few weeks I get a box with hand-picked outfits chosen by a real stylist, refined by their AI, and the crazy part is they actually nail it most of the time. Stuff I would never go buy, but I end up wearing nonstop just because it works. Here's what surprised me the most. I end up keeping most of what they send. They choose things based on my profile, and they hit the mark consistently, and I never feel like I'm forcing myself into something that's not me. So if you're busy and you don't want to think about what to wear, and you still want to show up looking sharp, then Taylor Style is worth checking out. Our listeners can get 25% off their first month by going to taylor.style/membership and using code EGGS, that's EGGS, at Taylor Style. That's TAELOR.style/membership and take 25% off your first month with code EGGS. Now, back to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Kevin M. Downey. Kevin, how are you? Happy New Year.
I'm good. Happy New Year to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of start at the beginning, Kevin. Let's talk a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our agency is called Kevin M. Downey. We've been around for 10 years. We do recruitment and sales and business development reps for clients and rep outsourcing for mostly in B2B, but some B2C companies. And that's basically it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's take a few minutes and just kind of unpack how you got here. One of the big things we like to showcase on this show is sort of the entrepreneurial journey, in addition to, flexing our guests' expertise. But we'd like to learn a little bit more about just sort of, your story. How did you end up here?
Yeah, I mean, it's I won't go too deep into that, but I grew up in Chicago, grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My maternal grandparents were entrepreneurial. My father followed into that and grew up around a family business, retail and wholesale, pretty big. And and then I ended up being in the golf industry as a kid and got into sales. That's how I ended up in Kansas City, moved around from a couple companies, kind of moved up the ladder, if you will, or the food chain. Ended up with Callaway Golf here in KC and for Kansas and Missouri. And and then I decided after a few years with a brand newborn and being on the road 7 days a week for however many months in a row that it was time to do my own thing. So that's how I got started, got into commercial real estate, had a few side businesses I started and sold, started and failed, certainly one or two. And then started our agency about 10 years ago and we're still running.
I love that. Yeah, no, thanks for that background. No, it's funny. I've only ever been to Kansas City once, but I remember there was a lot of confusion around the Missouri side versus the Kansas side. And I was tour managing a band back then. And so we were trying to coordinate where we were going to meet and all these things. And it was a whole thing. So anyway,
well,
but
now
great
the
city.
Hot button issue here is the Chiefs being moved from Missouri to Kansas, which is
yeah.
From KC Mo to KC Kansas, and that's got the locals not too happy.
Everybody's up in arms.
Side, right?
Oh, how funny! So cool. Well, let's I guess get into this a little bit more. You founded your agency sort of on this principle of being better and working harder. How did that philosophy evolve? You mentioned growing up in an entrepreneurial family and things like that. I imagine some of this may have been imposed on you, but can you talk about just sort of developing an ethos like that? I mean, I think a lot of people have the notion like work harder, but the piece that I think is really key there that maybe isn't part of it, of everybody else's sort of philosophy, is that be better part. And I wonder if you just talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, I try to set a really good example. I'm not a rah leader guy. That's not what I do. And my company's not huge, right? We're just 6 on my team plus the outsourced reps that we have for clients. I lead by example, right? So the goal is to always work as fast and as high quality as possible for clients. So you're always a step ahead of their request, right? That's what I try to teach my people. If they have to come asking you things, that means we're doing something wrong somewhere along the lines.
Yeah.
Right? So we always want to be a step ahead of them.
Yeah, no, I love that. Are you able to point back to a point in your career, as obviously you went into sort of an entrepreneurial path. Well, I mean, or I guess you chose this path as a result of the lifestyle that you were trying to build around your new family. But in your early entrepreneurial days, how did you know that that was going to be your path versus just, going to school and taking a job like normal people do? Like, how did you decide that
Yeah.
I'm willing to take this risk? And I
Well,
think for families that are entrepreneurial, it's a little easier,
yeah,
because you're at least exposed to that stuff, or it
for
feels
sure.
less risky.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you talk about just sort of your thought process a little bit.
Yeah, I think to that point, actually, I've always told people, you kids do what their parents did in a lot of cases, right? You see a lot of that same theme. Kids go to school in the areas and study the same things, and they end up professionally a lot like their parents. Not always, but you see a pattern and a theme with that, right? And it's mostly because they replicate what they know. Easier for me to be an entrepreneur because I grew up around it, right? My father was an employee ever since I was born, right, of anybody else. And I think it's just part of the way. And my maternal grandmother was an entrepreneur when she was 14, so it never worked for anybody else. So I think it was just part of the psychology of the way that I lived, and so it wasn't really a hard jump to start our own thing. I think also I saw the writing on the wall with the golf industry and just saw kind of an end game to it and the way things were changing. And it was just time, right? More than anything, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think pattern recognition is a big part of it, and being able to see that, you recognize that writing on the wall. I think
Yep.
for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially, they've always wanted to do a thing, or they think about a thing all the time and never actually chase it. And so I think being able to recognize that and then being able to take that next step into your own business is like one of those critical pivots that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah. I mean, I think given the employment market, and this is a more of a rabbit hole, maybe a different conversation for a different day, you're going to see more and more entrepreneurial type of psychology in people by force, right? I think there's going to be more freelancers. There's going to be more fractional people working, more fractional work and set up from executives all the way down to frontline people. I just think we're going to see more and more of that. People starting their own things. They're going to do it on the side at first, just by necessity. We're
Yeah,
going to see
no,
that.
I think you're right. And maybe we can use that as a segue to start talking about how we get started. Here we're having this conversation on the first Monday after the new year, this January 5th.
Uh-huh.
And for a lot of people, they're just coming back to work today, and or if you're anything like me, like I got laid off at Christmas last year from a side job I was doing. So
Right.
so when I hit the ground on January 5th or whatever it was last year, my whole world had switched, and it was time to
Sure.
go back into something. And so I think a lot of people look at the first of the year as sort of fresh starts and new beginnings. And I wonder if we could talk about, just sort of in the spirit of biz dev and creating teams and starting to build systems,
Yep.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about just like where you would start if you were starting fresh in 2026.
Easy. I think having been around this for 10 years, right? And before that entrepreneurial activity, but helping companies with what we do. And obviously our focus has changed a little bit in that time period, right? In 10 years, because we're not huge. So stick and move with the market a little bit. But I would say working with tons of small businesses and growing into mid-market and seeing different things, small businesses do a really good job at deliverability of what products or services they offer. Any entrepreneur, the first advice I would give them is pre-plan, start working on your lead generation system immediately, right? Because a lot of times we hear people have a deliverable, big or small, right? Whatever they do, and they perfect that, and they go to market and they can do it, and they get maybe a few clients from just relationships and all that network stuff and all that, but then they don't know what to do. I would advise people to start working on whether you're B2C and you need to learn how to market online or advertise online and get return on investment there to be able to drive leads in a systematic fashion, or in B2B where I spend more time. You have an easier way to build a system to generate leads because you can manually do it without money into advertising, right? There's two things you're going to drive leads day to day. It's going to be email, high volume email, or reps. That's it. Those are the only two things. There are other things that work, but they work intermittently. Like webinars can be great, but they're intermittent and they're hard to put on really well and drive the traffic, but you can do it. And trade shows are always great if they're targeted, right? But again, that's an intermittent thing. That's not a daily driver of leads.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And as somebody who's basically built a whole business that was just built on networking versus, actually lead generation, we talked a little bit before the show that I'm trying to launch this new company. And a big piece of that is we will need a steady flow of customers. This is new for
Sure.
me. And it's funny, we've been running a marketing agency for 20 years, but this wasn't our realm. We didn't do this kind of work. And we never had to for ourselves. We got a little bit spoiled. And so now as we're moving into this new industry and all this stuff, we've got to make new friends and we have to make them fast. Otherwise, there's not going to be any capital to do anything with. And so what would be, I guess, the one thing I liked about you mentioned in B2B that you can sort of, I guess, manually collect names, things like that. You could do some vetting through LinkedIn, stuff like that. I guess that's what you mean, that you're not paying for advertising necessarily to win those new leads. What are the things that people can do that are low budget, affordable? When does it make sense to get into email, that kind of stuff? Like where is the real beginning? So, because like for me, and I'll just speak as a total novice in this realm, pre-planning lead generation for me, I mean, at least would mean, okay, well, I'm going to start identifying people in the industry that I want to get in touch with or companies I want to work with. I'm going to identify key individuals in their company, it may be executive leadership or marketing directors or, money people or whatever. And then I'm going to try and find email addresses or contact information. And then I'm going to reach out and, this would be like, I guess, the low tech version of doing what you're talking about. But I wonder, I mean, is that really all there is to it? I mean, because it seems like, oh man, pre-planning lead generation, like this must be a huge thing, but is it really as simple as kind of what I just laid out there? Like at least in its most pure essence?
You're talking about maybe a little more manual way of doing it than, first of all, you always start with prospect list in B2B. So Apollo would be my recommendation to everyone. I mean, that's your, less expensive competitor to say ZoomInfo, which would be viewed as the gold standard of prospect data for companies, right? But I would get on Apollo, I would learn how to build prospect lists, and I would look at my total count. And then from that, we derive the business development system. So if we are dealing with tens of thousands of contacts or more, contacts, not companies, then email has to be part of what you do. And when I say email, I don't mean email through your CRM. I don't mean Constant Contact or MailChimp newsletter stuff. I mean direct response, one-to-one text-based emails, right? And not sequences, no of this, drip campaign stuff. That doesn't work. You want to drive response, you have to do what we do on the phone. Right? Johnny, do you have this pain point? If you do, I can help you solve it. This is what I have. This is what I want you to do next. I want you to reply. I'm going to send you stuff. And then we're going to, obviously we're going to follow up with them. We're going to try to move them call to action to a calendar, all that stuff. But you have to learn how to do email, right? And that means minimum level is thousands per day, right? Whether we're using, and we don't need to dig deep into the infrastructure side, but Apollo plus an email API or something like a Mailreef, a server-based system combined with, say, SmartLead as a CMS. Either way, you can build a system that can get deliverability and you can run thousands a day, and then you can layer that as big as you want to go. At one time when I was doing email for clients, we had one client for 7 out of 8 years. I had one client for 7.5 years, and we were sending at one point 36,000 emails a day.
Oh, wow. Well, so maybe that maybe kind of answers my question, but I had a thought here, is it better to have a lot of emails or not them, or like fewer, but better qualified emails?
Just need them to be targeted, right? They need to be verified and need to be reaching out to the right people, right? Okay. So depending on the size of the company, you might be targeting owners in SMB, but you're obviously going to be targeting employees as you go up in size for a lot of things, not everything. As an example, we target almost exclusively owners, but we deal in small business to mid-market. We do target just a smidgen, maybe less than 10% VPs of sales, CSOs, CROs, as part of our outreach, but we're almost exclusively targeting owners, right? As an agency for what we do. For what you guys do, for example, you're definitely going to be targeting some employees, but there's going to be some smaller businesses where you're going to hit owners too. And you just want to make sure that you're targeted with your outreach, and the volume of email you want to send is dependent upon the prospect list size. If you have 100,000, you want to send 100,000 a month. That's 5,000 a day. You don't want to email them more than once a month if you can help it.
Yeah. Well, and how do you, or I mean, maybe you have some advice on this. I mean, obviously, in a world of AI and stuff like that, we're starting to
Hmm.
see increased volume, a lot of automation in and around email space. The kinds of things that people are producing. I don't know. It seems to me anyway, like I'm getting a ton of these things that seem AI generated.
Hmm.
Um,
Probably.
what do you think about, I mean, automation, maybe first of all, but like, how do you break through when the world has become so noisy?
Just I mean, I looked at 250 or 300 setups for clients over 8 years because they would come to me, especially after I got a reputation, they'd come to me with what they are doing. So I would look at what they're doing. And to be very honest, I only saw 3 to 4 good setups out of a few hundred in 8 years. Most everybody does email wrong. They almost all use their CRM. They're sending from their main domain. They're almost all sending sequences or drip campaigns, and they market to people. They don't. Business development, lead generation in B2B is what you do on a cold call. It's not marketing to people, right? Like I said before, right? What would I do on a call? That's how I learned. And we failed at first for clients, ourselves and for clients, really, a little bit, because we were following everybody else. And this goes back 8 years ago. But once I realized, I was like looking at it, I was like, why are we marketing like this when it's not what we would do on the phone? Like, let's just do what we would do on a phone call, on an initial call. And that's how I learned how to write emails. So I voiced it and transcribe it and then tweak it a little so that it makes sense, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, block style copy, 125 words max, probably. Some, if I can get it down to 75 or even 65, that'd be great. You just got to learn how to do it that way, and you have to send volume.
Yeah. Well, and I won't ask you to fully improv one of these notes, but like what kinds of things are you putting into these messages? Like, I think you make a really good point. I mean, I will say this vast majority of spammy emails I get are, I have a service, you should buy it, and here's why. It's not, I think I heard you say, do you have a pain point?
Yeah.
And, so I think for people who aren't natural salespeople or who haven't spent a lot of time in sales, it might be
Mhm.
good to have you sort of differentiate what a marketing email is versus what a
Yeah,
sales
and
email might
to go
sound
back to
like.
history, when I dealt with clients on email, sales department and owners understood what we were doing much better than marketing people within the clients. And I dealt with owners more than I dealt with employees, but the marketing people were always the hardest to get to understand it because they can't turn off their marketing brain. They
Hmm.
keep wanting to push messages, right? So it's all about just ask them what you would ask them if you ran into them and you cold ducked them and you walked in the door, right? I meet John and John's got XYZ company and I've got whatever. Let's say it's us. Like I do outsource, reps as part of what we do. John, hey, could you use more? Could you use a good inside sales rep or could you use somebody to generate leads for your sales team? If you can, we do this. What I want to do is send you, a little information about our process and pricing and rates or whatever it is, PDF. And then if you're interested after looking at it, we'll jump on a call. That's it. I mean, that's right. If I
Yeah.
have a call, which goes to when we have smaller lists, we remove email and we focus a lot more on reps, right? But it's no different, right? The first thing when you make a call, you have the ability to keep going on the call. But with email, you have a stopping point. It's a reply. All I want is a reply. They can tell me to go away. They can tell me whatever. They can say, yes, I'm interested. Send the PDF. That's it, right? That's all we're
Yeah.
trying to do.
Well, and is the purpose of the volume to overcome, I guess, the ones that do get scrubbed off or get spammed or ignored or
Just,
whatever? Like, is that the purpose? Because certainly, I mean, if you had, I don't
yeah.
know, and nobody gets this, but if you sent out 5,000 emails and you got 5,000 responses, you'd be in trouble. So
Yeah,
it
you're
must be
not going
kind
to
of a
get
game of
5,000
numbers that you're playing
responses to
here,
cold
right?
email.
Yeah, no, certainly
Yeah.
not. But
Let me give you the best performing one in recent memory that I can give you with the algorithms the way they are and everything. So it would be ours more than a client's. Just because of the need and the targeting, and I've been doing it so long, I know how to message it really, really well. Done 100 emails for us at some point, right? In different variations. 12,000 outbound, 45 leads in a day.
okay.
That's about as good as you're going to do. So we're looking at like in that campaign, you're looking at like including negatives and not interested and unsubscribes. You're talking about a little over a 1% response rate. That would be exceedingly high. Like a normal client, 0.2, 0.3% response rate. I think people confuse like it's easy, but it's not, because if you don't have the volume, you're wasting time sending emails on your CRM where you can only send 50 to 100 a day per email address. Right? The management of those campaigns doesn't make sense. You can't send enough volume. What are you going to generate? A lead a week? I mean, and then your sales reps are playing around with the CRM and email instead of making calls, which was what they should be doing, right? Which is the big thing we get into these days when we're restructuring sales teams, especially in B2B.
Yeah, no, I think that that's an interesting topic, and maybe we could go into that a little bit more.
Sure.
I heard you on another podcast. It may have been your own podcast interviewing somebody else. I'm not sure, but you were talking about that idea about not having sales reps on LinkedIn and not having sales reps doing a number of other things that are sort of outside of the scope of prospecting or whatever. But it's the common stuff that sales reps do slip into, which is they start creating their own, email lists, or they start creating their own whatever it is. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just your perspective on that. Like, what's the role of the salesperson in all this?
Right. So because I'm tied to Aptiv Index, which is an assessment product, right? I'm a strategic advisor there and also recruiting all of our strategic advisors nationwide. I understand the profile difference between a hunter sales rep, a farmer sales rep, and a BDR. So BDR being hard cold outreach, right? All three of those are very different things. If you're, without going again too far into it, if your sales person's relationship is as a farmer, they are going to have an ongoing relationship with the customers, cross-selling, upselling, checking in with them, filling inventory, whatever you want to call it, then I'm fine with them doing their own prospecting because there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's a matter of putting them in a structure and a system where they can't fail. Right? Because they have to go build that customer base. But once they build the customer base, they're done with cold outreach, more or less. Whether it takes 6 months or 12 months, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? But they are not built for cold outreach, but they can do it and get through it. Hunter sales reps, which you get a little more of in B2B, is sales when you want the sales rep to do the selling, and this would be a principal sometimes initially, and they have no ongoing relationship with the customer, maybe an annual renewal, but that's it, because somebody else is doing the deliverable, right? Whatever the team is or the people are, whatever it is that you do, the sales rep really has no ongoing relationship. They are there just to close the customer, get paper, and then they're basically done with that relationship, right? So they're always selling in that sense, always doing new customer acquisition. They are not built for business development. They are the opposite profile to a business development representative. So we are paying the epidemic we're dealing with in B2B, and why we're seeing so much restructuring is that we are paying these sales reps in the United States that are hunter sales reps exorbitant salaries to do something that they aren't built to do and don't want to do. So they avoid it like the plague by spending time on email and their CRM and LinkedIn and whatever other BS they can come up with to avoid dialing the phone. And their job, if they're being paid to generate their own leads, is to either dial the phone or their boots on the ground. Those are the only two things they should be doing. You can automate email, you can automate LinkedIn, right? So in restructuring sales teams for B2B now, because biz dev has gotten so difficult, and you could say it was getting really hard decades ago, but obviously COVID exacerbated the situation. We want hunter sales reps to be booked with calls, or at the very least booked with leads all day, every day. And business development, email, and LinkedIn is all done by somebody else that is driving them appointments or leads, because they're more expensive. They're probably some of the most expensive people, relatively speaking, in a company, right? And if they're not going to do the business development, what's the point? We're just wasting money. Mm-hmm. So we have a new client that we're recruiting Latin American reps for to do business development in Texas. He had 7 salespeople, 2 and this was a farmer sales role, but he's been frustrated with the same problem. And he had 2 salespeople that were full books of business, 1 kid that was really humping it that had about 40% full. And then he had 4 reps he was paying salaries to that weren't doing much. And I just told him, I was like, keep a rep or 2, build a business development team, drive them leads and appointments. He fired 4 reps, kept the one kid, and then the two that had full books of business. And now he has 5 business development reps or 4 for that one salesperson. And they're going to keep driving him leads or appointments until he builds his book of business to where it's about 90%. Then we add another salesperson, and we then drive them the leads and the appointments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I actually really appreciate it because, like I say, I mean, I've always been on the marketing or on the design side of things. And so I haven't really spent a lot of time on the sales side. So for me, I mean, I'm sure for a lot of our listeners, this is old hat. But for me, this is all really interesting because even the delineation between sales reps is really a great insight for me. You know, as I'm thinking about the type of people that we might bring into our new organization and how we're small and we don't have a lot of capital, it makes me think, well, God, what one would you hire first? And where do you put the money? And, you know, these kinds of things. So I wondered if you'd maybe talk about that a little bit, which is, you know, based on a business size, you know, especially if somebody's coming into you and they're one of these smaller companies that you're working with. You mentioned earlier that you might do more rep driven stuff on the phone for a smaller company, which makes me think that you might do something different for a bigger company. So I wonder if you just talk a little bit about the strategies for companies, you know, small to large, and where would you start if you were starting with nothing?
Well, we can come to that, but let's go back to email and prospect list size. So if our contact list is big enough, email has to be part of what you're doing. So tens of thousands or more. Like I had a client, like I referenced, that was 36,000 a day at one point. That client's prospect list was over 800,000 contacts because they were in promotional products and corporate gift, which applies to everybody. Yeah. And you have multiple departments to hit plus owners and SMB. So you've got tons of people to go after. So email was their workhorse to drive inbound leads to sales reps who are farmers. They're a farmer style sales rep. They're account managers, right? They may get paper initially, but then they manage that customer and they keep selling to them, right? So I don't know that it's about company size, although capital matters, as much as what is the style of salesperson you have? Is it like, and we used yours as an example, as a salesperson theoretically going to sell, take you out of the picture, but if you hired a salesperson, are they going to keep selling to the customer in reality? Or once they get the customer, is it pretty much going to be managed by an entirely different part of the company?
Yeah, like in the case of us, it would be handed off to a project manager inside the company.
Very normal stuff, right? So that's a hunter sales rep model. So for you, because you can sell your own stuff, you should be your first salesperson and you should have a business development team that is driving you appointments because they are built for business development, which is, again, different than a hunter sales rep, where in Aptive Index, the language we use would be high influence and high intensity, whereas a farmer sales rep is high sociability. Right? It's not that they're low in the other things, but we're looking for the extreme thing we're looking for in the person to match them to the sales role. So when we're recruiting for clients, again, in the United States, recruiting anyway, we want to run everybody through Aptive Index because we want to, we have to identify, are they built for sales and what type of sales role? Mm-hmm. Right? Because I can, again, for business development, I want high consistency. I want high C because they're doing the same thing every day, 50 to 100 times a day. A high influence eagle, what we would call eagle sales rep, hunter sales rep prototype is not built for that. They don't want to do it. They're not built for it. They're built for influence and intensity and presentation and salesmanship, which is not what cold outreach is. Cold outreach is a marketing function done by salespeople, if you want to think of it that way. Business, right? That is.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because like I've always seen my role in the company as being more about developing the relationships, right? And that's because in our former agency, that's kind of how life was, people came to me because they knew me and they weren't even really hiring my company. They were hiring me and I just happened to work at my company, So it was kind of a different deal. And now we're trying to turn that around to where our company has reputation in the space and we're well known and people should hire us because we're the best in that business. And so that's a big switch for us. And so, or a big switch for me emotionally anyway. And so moving into this role where, I can go out and hunt for these prospects, based on these things that are driven to me, I think is a really interesting perspective because it's not something I've thought about before.
Yeah. Again, if start with Apollo, build prospect list. What's the total contact count look like? If it's in the thousands or 10, 15, 20,000, email's not going to be an important part of what you do. Like not newsletter. I'm talking about direct response, one-to-one text-based email. It's not going to be a core of what you do because you can only email people so often before if you email them too much, you're going to burn up the infrastructure too fast. So you can only email them once a month and then they'll forget they ever got an email from you for the most part. Right. I mean, I sent 105, 110 million emails for clients over 8 years. So you can watch a lot of different domains and email addresses and see what happens, and you see patterns and all that stuff. But if you have a big enough list, email needs to be part of it, but it's still business development rep in a hunter sales model, taking those leads, responding to them, following up with them to drive them, say, to you to do the initial sales for the company.
Yeah.
Right. Until you're too busy. And then you go hire a hunter sales rep who's built for that. And then you drive them all the leads and appointments.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, at least in my former sort of agency life and having worked with a number of other agencies over the years in the marketing and design space, advertising largely, I guess. Most of these companies have tried sales teams, and almost all of them will tell you that sales has never worked for them. And, it's funny because what I'm hearing, which is crazy. But I think a lot of them are probably like me, or maybe the ones I've been exposed to are more like me, which were like relationship driven, right? Everybody comes to us because they know us.
I've never heard that before either, by the way.
Yeah.
I think I've heard in 10 years, I've heard that line 500 times at least, if not 1,000.
Oh, how funny. And so, but what I'm wondering is just now, given the perspective of what you were just sharing, choosing the right salesperson for the position, those kinds of things, and using the right person at the right level. It makes me wonder, and I don't have enough insight to know how these people, did sales over the years, but it does make me wonder if maybe they chose wrong, if they picked the wrong person for the wrong position. And ultimately that was the problem. It wasn't that sales wouldn't have worked, but it didn't work for them because they did it wrong.
Business development and B2B will always work. Always. 100%. If the effort is there and you build the system and the process, it will always work. May take a little longer in some things than others, but it will always work. I've never seen it fail when it's done correctly. The problem is companies say they're relationship driven for a couple of reasons. They've struggled to hire salespeople who don't want to prospect. They didn't build them a system. They didn't build them a process. They expected the resume and the experience in the industry. Gosh, we hear that all the time. Oh, they have to have experience in our industry. Our industry is really unique. We're relationship based. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You can cold outreach any industry with any person. It doesn't take, I can be trained to cold outreach for anybody, for anything, right? I don't have to have great knowledge on it initially. Build a list, give me a phone, right? Johnny, hey, my name's Kevin. We do this. Curious if you have this problem.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's funny because, and maybe I'm projecting too much here, but what's resonating with me and what you're saying is that these all sound like the excuses that I've made and others have made as a reason to not do this. Right. Oh, I don't like doing sales, so I'll just say I'm relationship driven. Then I don't have to, whatever it is. But that's what that feels like to me now, hearing you kind of say it back.
Believing is seeing is believing. You ever heard that phrase before?
Yeah.
That's what it is. They don't want a cold call. They don't know how to build the system, and they don't know what they don't know. That's also another truism that we see in companies. Yeah. They hire employees. The owner doesn't know that the employee doesn't know what they don't know because nobody knows what they don't know. It sounds ridiculous, but it's very true.
Yeah.
It's just like dealing with marketing people in B2B. They don't know what they don't know. They have no idea how to build the infrastructure, so they just avoid it. And then they say, no, that won't work for us. Our industry is too unique. We can't use email. Okay. Whatever.
Well, a couple of things. So one, I would like to dive in a little bit more on the infrastructure and take a little more time with it. You've kind of zipped through it and talked about the different pieces, but let's spend a little more time on that. But one of the things I wanted to ask, just related to what we were just talking about, is at what point is an email list or prospect list big enough to bother with email? You said that in some cases it's not big enough for that. Like where would you start to draw lines and saying that this is borderline too small or too big to not have email? Or
let's say if we use a mail reef infrastructure and we do one server, you can send 100,000 across the server. I got to do this in my head. So 50,000 cold, 50,000 warming. So 50,000 divided by 20 days is 2,500 a day. So 50, I'd like to see the list be 50,000 or bigger. A little smaller than that would be okay. But
and as part of that, just vetting the size of your audience too. Just understanding how big of a group of people you have to talk to. Like if you can't get 50,000 people on there, not to say that your business couldn't be successful or whatever, but that's a good indicator for you've got a big enough market to go after.
Right. Go into Apollo and you build a prospect list, right? So you got to build it, narrow the industry stuff down or use keywords or whatever that involves, right? Primarily is what you're doing is industry or keywords. You don't use SIC codes. And then you've got to build the titles, right? And then you look at the titles of the people, make sure you're pretty targeted there. You don't want to target owners at a company with 5,000 people, right? They have nothing to do with what you're probably selling. You're going to target employees of different kinds, right?
Sure.
So you build those titles, and then you've got your company targeting, and it could be very narrow in some cases. I had a guy last week wanted to do email and me to teach him, and he wanted hedge fund managers. There's like 3,500 in the country. I'm like, dude, email, you need somebody to call. You got like, it's just too small. Like there's no way you can make use of email at that point. And that's really all it is. You just got to build a prospect. Let's see what it looks like.
Now, is it still worthwhile, like in an audience of 3,500, let's say, so in a really niche crowd like that? I mean, is it still, I mean, would email, just even if it's just personal email, just you working through your emails and sending notes over to these different people in an effort to just kind of get a door open, would that still be worthwhile and somehow different than just like email automation, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's when we would go into a rep calling, but then also sending emails as part of what they do with each call. Goes into a slightly different topic, but I would say, yes, sometimes that absolutely is the methodology. So long as when we're training the rep that they understand it is not an admin job. It's the same problem we have with salespeople. When COVID hit, they all got a pass for prospecting, right? Because, you know, rightfully so, they couldn't get a hold of anybody. Everybody went home. These companies, you know, none of these things were where their phones were rolling over. A lot of them weren't, right? So they couldn't get a hold of anyone. They couldn't go see him in person. So they had a pass. Well, how long do we need to give them that pass for? Like a year and a half, 2 years? Okay, that's fine. But we're long past that now. Mm-hmm. So we just need to be very careful that reps know what their job is. So in other words, when we have like my outsource team, or if I'm training a rep for a client, in general, I do not want reps sending manual emails, but there are times when you build it into the system and the process. So long as they understand it's a calling job first.
Yeah.
It's a calling
job. Yeah. And that makes sense. Yeah. That it would just be like an aspect of the job, right? You make the phone call first. If they want the follow-up, you follow up in email or whatever.
Or you can cold email them, as to your point. If it's a really, really narrow niche list, then yeah, you do the cold manual email. Don't even automate it because it's not worth the hassle at that point. Just manually email them, because you're not sending that many a day. You're sending what? 20, 25, 30 emails a day or something. That's okay. Remember, when we do marketing email to generate leads with automation, we are not sending on the main domain. So then when we get a rep doing manual emails, we have to be careful that they limit the volume of cold emails, because they can do damage to the main domain if they,
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you say that, because I just had circled it here on my little piece of paper, which is sending from the main domain. You, in that same podcast I was listening to where you were speaking on this topic, one of the things you said is absolutely, it's verbatim or, verboten. People are not allowed to use the, primary domain, yourofficial.com for emailing. So how does that work? Like, why can't they do that? And then what should they be using instead?
I mean, you're just damaging your main. I mean, you're going to damage a domain if you're cold emailing with any volume. Whether you do a structure like MailReef where you're spreading out that infrastructure. If you've ever heard of Instantly, again, Smart Lead, campaign management systems, and the concept of doing, let's say on MailReef, as the server, you're doing 20 domains and 100 email addresses. And you're doing that because you want to send 25 cold emails a day per email address, but they are all tied to one campaign, right? Whereas if you do it with your CRMs are not built for that. And that's why they always fail, because you can only send small volume and each email address is its own campaign. That's a waste of time to manage that. It doesn't make any sense. So just manually email at that point. But my point is like in a MailReef type structure, we're sending 25 per email address per day, but we're doing it across 100 email addresses for one server. So we're sending 50,000 cold per month, right?
Yeah.
We are not using the main domain, right? At all, obviously.
Sure.
We're creating 20 different domains specifically for this use case and 5 email addresses for each domain.
Well, and are these going to be like subdomains of the main domain? So like, I guess so that there's some kind of brand relationship, if you work at XYZ Corp, like, are they getting emails from sales.xyzcorp.com or something? What's the connection?
Yeah. Some do subdomains. I think that looks a little bit weird. To me, we just created new domains for everybody. Like, you need 20 domains. It's actually AI. It's one of the first AI things I used was that, actually, to create, automatically create domains. And so we would always start with a company name. So let's say it's kevinmdowney.com. We would do kevinmdowneyonline.com, kevinmdowneypro.com. KevinMDowneySales.com, KevinMDowneyUSA.com, and keep going, right? And you would have the AI create 30 or 40 and pick the first 20 and boom, go.
Right. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We started to talk about it, or I sort of mentioned that we should, which is take a little bit more time to talk about this infrastructure, so the thing that we actually have to build. So if you're a business owner, maybe you run a small company, but you're still involved in your sales process and you're trying to grow, what does the actual set of tools look like? So, I mean, because in my mind, I would have just gone to like MailChimp or something and got an email thing and uploaded some emails and started sending from there. Like, I mean, but those guys are kind of expensive, and the more emails you throw in there, it gets expensive and stuff like that. And so I wonder, what is our
emails through them?
You mentioned the, building the infrastructure the right way, because you've seen so many setups that were wrong. So what is the right way? Like, if we're going to build something and we're being wildly ambitious, we're sure we're going to scale. It's worth putting in the ground level work to make sure we build the right tool. What's the way to do it without, I guess, overspending? I understand there's some giant versions of this that you could really scale, but is there a good scalable tool that we could start with, or set of tools?
There's two different infrastructure models that I would do. So let's start with the simple one, and it's brute force, right? It's Apollo plus an email API, single domain, can send up to 6,000 emails a day. You're going to have to ramp up to that. You're going to have to run reputation management emails against that domain, but you're never going to be able to hold reputation entirely in that model, because you're sending all that volume from a single domain. You are going to get marked as spam no matter what you send. Because there are some people that say that if you cold email them and you don't know them, that's actually an invasion of their privacy. Some feel that way. Like, that's why I'm all for not doing the phone. Like, I'm all for email. You can email me as much as you want from anywhere. I don't care. But you can't hit my digital device. You hit my phone with a text, now you cross the line. That's my view, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll block all of that, right? And it's also illegal, so companies don't do it that much. But email's legal, right? So the difference is like, you're going to get marked as spam some. You just, like, in the brute force infrastructure of Apollo and an email API, you're going to get deliverability issues at some point, but you can still generate a ton of leads, even if you get 30 or 40% block, which is almost always going to come from Google, by the way. Any email address that's hosted by Google, that's going to be the hard one. That's going to be the first one that blocks you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. More than
and so in a brute force model like that, like you're talking about, I mean, even understanding some of the implications down the road, that you will get blocked or that you might damage reputation to a single domain, like, would that still be a good entry level point for a small business, like, versus thinking about all the implications about further, future damage to that domain or whatever? Like, would it be okay for your first 6 months, let's say, or whatever, or even maybe your first year to approach it like that?
We still use that infrastructure in my agency, and we run 4 to 5 domains at all times, and they're all kind of trashed. But I mean, it's easy to manage, it's fast, and we generate a lot of leads that way. Because we are typically sending, because our list size is really big, so we're typically sending about 20,000 a day.
So, and can you elaborate a little bit on like what this email API thing means? Like, is that using a tool like a MailChimp or something like that? Or
No. Email
directly
API
pinging a service or something?
A Mailgun connects to Apollo or SendGrid.
Okay.
Again,
so just purpose-built email marketers. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you got to watch your terms of service on those things. But the reality is that's what companies use, right?
Yeah.
So that's the brute force infrastructure, and that's easier, relatively speaking. For people that are novices, it seems overwhelming, because I do train companies. I don't email for companies anymore, but I consult and train companies on how to build it themselves. And when they're completely novice, both are hard.
And on this brute force level too, like, I mean, is that scalable? So let's say you do start to find some success. Do you just add domains? Is that how you scale, basically?
Add a domain and an email address. You can just keep going.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
I mean, you can put 5 boxes on an Apollo user. The cost factor is next to nothing. You just got to learn how to run it. If you want long-term infrastructure, though, that's when you get into a MailReef plus SmartLead, for example. Although MailReef's going to have their own CMS. Mike Benson is their CEO. Very good company, make a great product. They've got their own CMS coming out, so we won't necessarily have to use SmartLead or Instantly, let's say, or whatever else. Email Bison is another one. They should be able to do it through MailReef here pretty soon, from what I hear. With MailReef, you're talking a more long-term infrastructure because you're doing all those domains and email addresses. So you're holding reputation long-term because you're running 50,000 cold emails on a server, 50,000 warming emails across all those domains in that server, and you're spin taxing all your emails. So you're really trying hard to hold the infrastructure in place. It's not throwaway. You want to hold it, right? Because it's not brutal. It's not expensive, but it's not something you want to just toss.
Right.
Because the setup is more involved.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, and so for the beginner, doing something like a brute force model, this is where some of your data may be throwaway, right? You're trying to build this audience in the first place, that kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot of just stuff scrubbed out of there, right? So what you're saying is with the more advanced model or sort of the, the gold tier, it's, more about preservation of the data that you've got and having good data on those companies, who responded, who read, who opened, et cetera, all that stuff over a list over longer term.
It's just infrastructure reputation, right? So your IP address, everything you're doing with those domains, those email addresses, you want to keep the reputation of those things intact. That's why you run such low volume on each email address. It's why you have to spin tax. It's why you're running cold to warm is a 1-to-1 ratio, right? You're for every cold email you send across an email address, you've got a warming email that's going out that you can't see. It's invisible. That's going out, and a reply is happening invisibly on when you set that up that way.
Oh, okay. No, that's super interesting. Well, and I mean, like, is this the kind of thing? I mean, obviously you train companies in this, so I assume there's some level of sophistication required to do this. If you're advising somebody or if they wanted to try and get in touch with you, like what is the, I guess, engagement look like if somebody was to reach out to somebody like you, and when is the right time?
Go to the website, hit me on schedule a call. We don't actually publish the email training program and consulting on the website. Ironically enough, we just focus on the rep stuff, recruiting, and then the outsourcing. But if they just get in touch with me, I only can take so many clients on that. Just because I'm not that big and it's got to be me, right? Unfortunately, I don't have somebody else in my company that can do it. So I can only take like a client or two a month on that, but I can help them directly. And it's just like a 30-day consulting engagement. It's very low cost. I charge $4,500. I work with them one-on-one. And if it goes past 30 days, it's no big deal. It takes 60 days. I don't really care. Some companies take longer. We were talking about bigger companies. So the bigger the company, the more layers of people you have involved. Usually things slow down the more people I have involved that I have to deal with.
Yeah, it makes sense. Anything with all that extra red tape. Well, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about reps. And the reason is I think a lot of small companies might be reticent to get into hiring people, even if they are fractional people, in the first place. Like, I think it might be a little bit scary or intimidating for some people. But can we make the case for reps and why in some cases that might actually be the better way to go?
I've said reps never fail. Like, if they do it right, they don't fail. If they do the job and they do it right and they're taught the right way, it's not going to fail. It just sometimes takes longer because it's slower. But there's an argument for it, right? Because unlike email, like getting back to the basic gist of what we're doing, when we do the cold outreach on email, we're waiting for a reply, right? We want them to reply. That's all we're trying to do is drive replies. We don't care about opens. We don't care about clicks. We don't measure any of that. Don't care. How many leads am I getting? That's all I want to know. Right? With a rep, though, I can generate that lead and I can take that conversation further on the first call and get all the way to an appointment. I'm not going to do that with email. Hardly ever. Right? So with a rep, I can dig deeper. We can hit narrow audiences. We can switch audiences quick. We can do a lot of different things with reps. That email by itself really, I mean, somebody's going to manage the email and reply on stuff, but it's really good to have a baseline of reps, whether it's sales or biz dev, sales dev type reps. They're replying to email leads, but they're also doing cold outreach, or they're exclusively doing cold outreach, right? Depending on the size of the audience. If I only have 4,000 people to call on, I only need one rep to do that. I don't need email. I don't need multiple reps. I only need one. So, building the system, it'll always work.
Yeah. So when is then the right time? Like, so if you're a small business owner and you're trying to think about getting into sales, like in a real way, What is the right time to engage with either a company like you or starting to build your own deck, those kinds of things? And you mentioned, at the very top, pre-planning and stuff like that is the very first thing you would
You
say.
mean
I mean,
before they
obviously it makes
started their
sense, right?
business?
Yeah, exactly. Get started, right?
Sorry,
I
I'm
know it's
making a
crazy.
joke out of it, but I would say before you start your business would probably be a good idea, but that's not realistic, right?
Sure. But for people who are like, I don't know, maybe have been doing it on their own or trying to be
Yeah,
mom and pop for a long time or whatever, and now they're ready to scale
yeah.
or they want to do something different. Like, I don't know. Like, I think there's probably a time that it doesn't make sense to call somebody for help. Like, you should just be doing it on your own. Maybe not. But, I'm just curious
I mean,
where your thought is on that.
yeah, in our case, we do recruitment, right? More than we do outsourcing, right? So we're recruiting reps in the United States for clients, sales and biz dev. We're recruiting reps in Latin America for them to contract directly for sales and biz dev. And I've got my own inside sales team that they can contract and outsource to. I think it all depends on the company and where they're at. And to be honest with you, some outsource people come to me for outsourcing and we turn away. And I'm not bragging when I tell you this, it's just because I'm pretty particular. We turn away 50% of the people that come to us that want us to do biz dev for them. And or sales, just because it's not a fit or it's going to take too long to get them ROI. They need to have their own rep and they need that. They just need to do it that way. It's better.
Yeah.
Right. But it just depends on what they have and who they're targeting. I think the biggest challenge in business development today for B2B is that the audiences are so wide for certain things. IT, cybersecurity, promotional products, corporate gift, printing. I mean, I go down the line of all the stuff we've dealt with over the years. Sure. There are certain things that can hit almost anybody anywhere in the country, right?
Right.
That gets tricky. So I try to teach clients to narrow the scope somehow, some way, geographically, vertically. Just like with print, we try to teach clients to recruit a rep and they target one industry type, right? They're doing direct mail, go call, this rep's calling dentists. That's it. That's all they do is call dentists. So they learn the lingo, they learn how they work, all that stuff, right? Yeah. IT, I would say almost the same thing. Start geographically, start at a certain size, right? Narrow the scope, perfect that process and system first, then expand it. Now go to another city or go to a different size company.
Right? You mentioned that you guys are doing, the recruiting and stuff like that for the rep. So what does the engagement look like with you? So do we hire you, you find us a rep, and then we employ the rep? Or correct. Do we route these guys through you? And especially with your Latin American reps and things like that, are we working directly with the representative, or do we work with you as an agent of the representative?
Right. So no, on the outsourcing model, they definitely are going through my agency and the reps are employed by me or contracted by me, I guess in some cases, right? And they are predominantly Latin America. When they want to recruit a rep that they're engaging directly, they engage them directly. We get paid a placement fee after they hire the rep. So whether it's United States or Latin America, they come to us, they say, we want you to recruit us this salesperson. We want this type of salesperson. Okay, great. They sign a proposal. We get to work. We market the position via a lot of different methods. We drive candidates in, mostly have them take assessment if they're US based. And then it's up to the client to interview and determine who they want to hire. Then they pay us.
Okay.
It's just a flat $6,000 placement fee for a rep in the United States, $3,000 placement fee for a rep in Latin America.
Okay. And with your reps in Latin America, I mean, are there any language barriers or anything like that we need to be concerned about? I mean, are accents thick and it makes it challenging, or is it just not really that big a deal?
I mean, that's what we do. So we get 50 a day from 48 countries. And we're always recruiting, right? It's like speculative recruiting, if you will. We don't do that in the United States. Every recruiting gig we do for clients is custom for them. Latin American recruiting is the opposite. We are only recruiting one dashboard of candidates, and it's all sales and business development for all the clients that come on that want to sign on that. And we get 50 a day. We get 3 to 5 placeable reps per day. So they have to have very good English speaking skills. A lot of the kids down there now have US degrees. They've done it online. They've come here for college, worked for a while and gone back home. The kids that are from, financially, economically better families, let's say, stronger financial backgrounds, those kids have been speaking English now since they were 3, like they were toddlers. All of them. I mean, they may have an accent, yes, but they've been speaking English since they were toddlers.
Yeah. Is there an opportunity with some of these Latin American contacts or people who might speak Spanish as a native language? I mean, can you work in Spanish also? So if you have a company that maybe wants to reach a Latin American audience, is that something that can be facilitated?
Did a recruiting gig for a client doing that, right? They wanted a rep that was bilingual, which obviously is the case already. They're going to eventually be targeting all Latino based law firms in the United States. So they're going to speak to them in Spanish predominantly because they market themselves as Spanish attorneys, right? And firms.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. We have a small team in Spain, and so we spend a lot of time in Spanish language and do a lot of like transcreation of documents and things into native Spanish and things like that. And so I think that that's a really interesting thing too, because it really does open up a whole nother piece of the world. You know, if you have a business or a product or a service or something that might be applicable. Also finding reps that have, you know, I don't know, knowledge of the local scene, you know, somebody who can, you know, maybe is from a particular country and has experience in that country and can, you know, really help your product shine in that world.
We're doing one now specific to that. We're doing recruiting in Argentina. Well, I think they really want them in Buenos Aires. So we're trying to find Buenos Aires, but somebody could relocate somewhere in Argentina. We're recruiting specifically that right now. We don't do that a lot. Most of the reps we're recruiting are going to work from home office, remote work, sales, and stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just think it's an interesting opportunity. I know it was what we found trying to work in Spain. You know, the cultural differences are huge, and like a lot of things that you might not even know about that, you know, you may be able to benefit from working with a rep in a foreign country like that. So I think that's very cool. So you touched on it kind of quickly, but we're starting to get to the end of the hour. So let's just take a quick minute. Where can people get in touch with you? How can they engage? You know, what's the best way to communicate with you if they'd like to reach out offline?
KevinMDowney.com is the website. We have a schedule a call or a contact form, whatever's easier for them. Again, our programs and pricing is right on there. So it's, you know, recruiting for a placement fee, right? No money up front. Or if they want to outsource to my team, that's fine. But obviously they're paying up front in that case. Right?
Sure.
And it's that easy. And if they need help with email, they just need to get in touch with me, schedule a call, and I'm glad to help them. Again, I can only take a limited number of clients with that, but glad to help them if I can put it on the schedule, no problem.
Love it. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It was great chatting. We got almost a whole hour in. That was great.
Yep, I love it. Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a happy new year. And thanks to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.
All right. Just like that. So